Joe Pojman is actually a rocket scientist. He gave up his career in the NASA complex to go become a full-time pro-life advocate in Austin, Texas. Good morning, Dr. Pojman.
Good morning, gentlemen.
And, full disclosure, if I accidentally lapse and call Dr. Pojman Joe, I have been working with him for more than 20 years in Austin.
That's true. That's true, Brent. And you made great impact here in Texas.
Well, you're too kind, but I'll tell you, Dr. Pojman, I'm looking at a National Public Radio website article from an article that they broadcast just on July 3rd and says losing a pregnancy could land you in jail in post-Roe America. And from all I can tell, watching the regular media, women who get pregnant and go get an abortion are going to end up behind bars for the rest of their life. Not to mention that women's lives are at risk because they're going to die from their inability to get an abortion.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that coming true at all. In fact, it's not coming true, and it has never been true. Yeah, so we do have that decision that the Supreme Court handed down on June 24th, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which completely overturned the terrible Roe v. Wade precedent. Okay, so let's look at some of the horror stories that have been predicted when that came down, and one of them is that women are going to be arrested for having a miscarriage because that would be evidence they were actually having an abortion, and they would be guilty for participating in abortion. The problem with that fairy tale are several. Number one, we haven't had any women who have been prosecuted for abortion under any of these laws that have gone into effect since that time. Texas and 12 or 13 other states that have contingency laws that are triggered by the Supreme Court's decision. Texas is one of those. Louisiana, Arkansas, a number of others. They are the women in those states now. Abortion is not permitted. Unborn babies are completely protected from abortion beginning at conception, and we have no reports of any woman being prosecuted for abortion, which all of those laws explicitly exclude a woman from any prosecution for being involved in abortion, even if she is the woman on whom the abortion is performed, or even if she participates in some kind of self-abortion procedure. She cannot be prosecuted under those laws. And I know that very well because here in Texas, and of course, as I said, there are some 13 states, and more states are passing laws to do this, Idaho being another one. They are, those laws, like in Texas, specifically have an exclusion, so a woman can't be prosecuted. Then the question is there going to be some kind of overzealous prosecutor who's going to do that and say, okay, there's evidence of something? It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened, and it's been, 3 months since the Supreme Court did the right thing and overturned Roe versus Wade, but haven't seen that. So I don't think that's happened. It hadn't happened in the past, which I'd like to talk about if you've got a chance, and it's not going to happen going forward.
Well, that point bears repeating that despite what we hear in the popular media, many of these laws, I don't know if all of them do, many of these laws that outlaw abortion explicitly exclude the pregnant woman as even a potential defendant. Another point is, this idea that women are going to die because they can't get an abortion when medical care really calls for it has always been false. Abortion, when it is truly necessary to save the life of a mother, and it is simply, if it's medically necessary, that's always going to be constitutional. And any law that tries to limit that is going to be unconstitutional. There's not going to be any law that says, well, you have to let the mother risk dying in order to save the child. That's not the law. And yet, we see the not just the commentaries out there, not just the op-eds, but actual news organizations like National Public Radio putting out articles and broadcasts such as losing a pregnancy could land you in jail in post-Roe America. And of course, ultimately, this goes back to the predisposition of the media to show one particular viewpoint, and they seem to become increasingly detached from the facts.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, first of all, let's look at what happened before before Roe versus Wade, blocked Texas pro-life law, a law that had been on the books since 1854. So we had from 1854 to 1973 in Texas, one state, were women prosecuted for abortion, a woman on whom abortion was performed. Our attorney, our special counsel, a gentleman who lives in Chicago, Paul Linton is his name, former general counsel of American United for Life, did a lot of research on this and found that, and he's not the only one, but they have all found that not in Texas had a woman ever been prosecuted for participating in abortion from 1854, the first time the law was passed, to 1973. And the same is true of all other states. No woman had ever been prosecuted for abortion. No one had been convicted. There were one or two, an amazingly small number where prosecution was started and then it was dropped, or, no one was ever prosecuted or convicted, I should say. And that is an amazing fact, considering all the hype about this. So then let's look at 1973 to this year, 2022. And we had some stories out there. There's some law professors who published an article a few years ago claiming there are all kinds of cases of women who were prosecuted and so forth. Paul Linton looked at every one of those cases and found that there were, about 8 cases over a period of, about 16 years. It ended up being about 1 case every 4 years where a woman was prosecuted for something like homicide or homicide of the unborn child, because most states, after Roe versus Wade, do criminalize taking the life of the unborn child in the course of violent crime, like assault or murder of the mother. And can the mother be charged with causing the death of the unborn child? In Texas, we have explicit exclusion. We have the unborn child is recognized as a person in the womb for purposes of homicide and assault, the same as a newborn child cradled in the mother's arms. But the woman cannot be prosecuted, even if she causes the death of the child herself. That's the case in all these other states. So there were a handful of cases, but very, very few, and these law professors were way overhyping this. And now, as we said, post-Dobbs, from June 24th to now, we're just not hearing about these cases. So, yes, a lot of crying wolf, a lot of hyping to try and discredit the pro-life gains, discredit the Supreme Court. But we scratch below the surface, and you don't have to scratch very far, and you see it's a lot of hype and not a whole lot of substance.
All right, Joe, well, we're going to get ready to take a break, but before we do, I'll point out that before all this hysteria started, as recently as 2015, the Guttmacher Institute, Planned Parenthood's so-called research arm, itself said that women are not commonly charged in the United States for the crime of self-inducing an abortion. So before the hysteria started, they were at least being a little more reasonable with the facts. But now, after Dobbs, it seems like all reason has left the room. So how have you dealt with this or confronted this in your work since the decision came down?
That is a great question. Of course, Dobbs is a decision back in June in which the Supreme Court completely overturned the terrible Roe v. Wade precedent and allowed states to pass protective laws like Texas, Arkansas, numbers, Ohio, we hope will do very soon, and so forth. That's the decision that we're referring to, Dobbs. So in that time, we were trying to get ready for media response. And my communications team and I, we were ready with talking points. And I will say we were a little surprised that there would be so much misinformation in some, not all, but some of the media accounts claiming that women are going to be prosecuted. No, they're not, because there's explicit exclusion from women being prosecuted in the Texas law. Well, women are going to be not able to get treatment for ectopic pregnancy. No, the Texas law, and this is the case throughout the country, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, makes this very clear in some of their publications. It's that state-by-state survey, all the states that have these laws exclude treatment for miscarriage. So those can continue to go on. And that's a case where if left untreated, that child will certainly die. even and the woman's life is in danger also. So that treatment is clearly permissible under all the state's pro-life laws. How about treatment for miscarriage? Well, miscarriage is when the child dies before born, and when that happens, there's not an abortion even to talk about because the child has perished, the child has died. So yes, that's clearly permissible. What if the child is in the process of dying, or there's some grave concern that the pregnancy is going to cause severe risk to the mother's very life, or loss of major bodily function? Well, there's an exclusion in all the laws that I have seen that allow an abortion to go on in those cases when the life of the mother is in danger, or there's a severe risk of loss of major bodily function. These are very rare. These are very rare cases, but the things are in there. Now, what might happen? Well, let's suppose there's the woman is in the second trimester, the water breaks. Okay, that means the amniotic fluid leaves. In almost all these cases, the child's going to die because the child has to have amniotic fluid to learn how to breathe and exercise that. So the child's going to die. If the woman doesn't have, if we don't do something, she's going to get an infection, which could lead to mass infection in her entire body, putting her life at risk. Typically, what a pro-life doctor would do is to induce labor. The intent is not to take the life of the child. That child is not being dismembered or any action to deliberately take the life of the child, but the child is too young to live, has not reached the age of viability. So typically, the doctor induces labor, the baby is born, will die soon afterwards, but the intent was not to take the life of the child. The intent is to save the mother's life, which will happen. She will be consoled to some extent. I mean, this is the loss of the baby, but at least she will have a baby that she hasn't taken responsibility for the death of that baby, and they can grieve the loss of that child, and have a funeral if wanted to, and if they wish, and a burial. But the point is that is the moral way to handle this type of circumstance. The woman is not; her life can be protected. In classic ethics, this is called the principle of double effects. The action is taken. The intent is to save the life of the mother. The indirect and unintended result is the loss of the child. But this is classic principle of double effects. So the law that all the states around the country that have been passed that protect unborn babies from abortion have this type of exception. So it's frustrating to me to hear some cases where women who have miscarriage or the baby is in the process of dying can't get treatment. That's frustrating to me because there are some doctors out there that claim they don't want to get prosecuted under the new pro-life laws in Texas or other states, but they are just abandoning their patients, and they need to take responsibility for their patients and do what's right. And it's just hard to imagine that in Texas or any other state, that doctor is going to be prosecuted for anything. I mean,
right.
That's not the law. The language is so clear in these laws, and in fact, it's the very language that was upheld back in 1992. Some of your savvy listeners are going to remember Planned Parenthood v. Casey. The Supreme Court upheld that exception that I described as constitutional.
Well,
so, I don't think there's a really issue here, but it's just being hyped, as you say, Brent.
Well, what you mentioned a moment ago about intent, that's always the critical issue in any criminal prosecution, is whether or not the defendant had the requisite intent. If the doctor's intent was to save the life of the mother, then there's not going to be a criminal prosecution.
That's true. And, I'm wondering, Dr. Pojman, Rudy Carlos here, I'm just questioning whether the midterms have anything to do with the reason why they're co-opting this sort of language, right? I mean, they're saying, well, if it's an ectopic pregnancy, it's automatically an abortion, or they're equivocating these two things. Do you think that, the Democrats are coming into the midterms really with nothing, and they're trying to make something out of nothing in this case?
Oh, could we? That's a great point. Is it possible that this is being politicized for political reasons, and these patients who are suffering these terrible losses are being exploited by one party or certain elected officials and the media to try to hurt pro-life Republicans or just pro-life candidates? Yes, I think that's really possible, and I think it's despicable, but this kind of thing goes on. And I'm really glad you're bringing up this topic. It's for a lot of people who have suffered miscarriage, it's not pleasant to think about. I mean, you lost that baby. And in some cases, the woman was contemplating possibly losing her own life. This is life and death stuff. This is really tough. But we have got to educate the public about what's really going on. These pro-life laws that have passed, those so-called trigger laws that were triggered, go into effect when Roe was overturned, are fantastic laws. They're great laws, and they are protecting babies' lives. And as I said, here in Texas, which I know so well where I reside, and I'm in the state's capital, Austin, we've had our law in effect now, our pre-Roe laws and now our Human Life Protection Act, as it's called, the trigger law, been in effect for now 3 months. We have not heard of a single case of a woman being prosecuted. This is not going to happen. It's not intended to happen by the lawmakers and the governor. It's not going to happen. If it is, it's some rogue district attorney who is going to get there's ways to correct that. I just think this is they're trying to make something out of nothing. They're trying to make hay, and frankly, you see this kind of thing when one party or the other doesn't have enough real issues to talk about, so they try and manufacture this issue and exploit these tragedies in the way. It's reprehensible. It's a shame, but we've got the best anecdote for it is shining the light on it, as you're doing, gentlemen.
Well, that's an excellent point. A lot of pro-lifers might have originally thought after the Dobbs decision came down that we have won the battle. And in fact, what has happened is the battle, in line with the exact ruling of the court, is it moved from the national level and the focus in Washington, D.C. on this, and the Supreme Court especially, to each of the 50 state capitals and to our local communities. And so now, in many ways, the job of the pro-lifer has become a little more complex. Pro-life advocates need to be better informed now. They need to understand so that when they're faced with just factually incorrect, really non-fact-based arguments, when they're faced with hysteria and irrational arguments, they need to be able to calmly point out the facts, point out what the law is, point out that it's not true that a woman whose life is genuinely in danger can't get an abortion. 2 political activists who are campaigning knocked on my door, 2 women, a few weeks ago. And one of them ended up telling me she was a 60-year-old woman. And she told me that she didn't feel safe now after the Dobbs decision.
They knocked on your door?
They were campaigning.
Wow.
And and to their credit, they wanted to engage me in a real conversation. We talked for about 20 minutes, but in the course of the conversation, as a 60-year-old woman, she says she doesn't feel safe after Dobbs. So part of the response here is just an irrational, just hysterical emotional response, because the idea of abortion has just become so ingrained through the public relations efforts. Let's face it, Planned Parenthood is good at that. They've gotten in the schools. They've infected the curriculum in our schools. They have infected the medical field. Mm-hmm. And that kind of thinking is out there. And the job of pro-lifers, and not just professionals like Joe Pojman, but of all the pro-lifers who are out there, who might encounter somebody outside an abortion facility, who might engage in a topic of conversation with somebody without any notice at all, just it could happen anywhere. It really helps if you can just know the basic facts. It's the pro-life issue hasn't gone away. It's just become more challenging.
Brent, let me put in clarify for Brent's for your listening audience. Brent, we've known each other and come down, and you've come down and testified in the Texas Capitol a number of times over 20-year period, and I can vouch and say that there's nothing in Brent's demeanor or appearance that would give a 60-year-old woman any cause to be afraid. None whatsoever. So it must have been something you read.
What about the baby? Did the baby feel unsafe?
Yeah, that's really the ultimate comeback, isn't it?
Yeah.
But for people who want to engage in my idea in talking with people in those situations is try to plant a seed, try to ask a question, often in the form of a question, try to make a point, but often just ask a question that might just stick in their mind. Try to say something that might just sit there in the back of their mind that they just might not admit immediately, but that eventually, if they reflect on it, will bring them around. Joe, we've only got 30 seconds. Any last words for our audience?
Thanks for having me on here. And if anybody's wished to get some of this information on our website here in Texas, TexasAllianceForLife.org, but consult your local pro-life organization in each of your states. I'm sure they've got a similar message. We've got to combat this nonsense with the truth.
Dr. Pojman, we appreciate you being on. Thank you for your work, and we hope we'll be talking to you again in the future. Thanks again.
Thanks, gentlemen.